First story. It was one of those terrible evenings when the rain beat on the window and darkness enveloped the street. I decided to spend the evening in the library to get away from loneliness and unbearable silence. My life was one-dimensional, and I needed some way out. I grabbed my umbrella and headed to the local library where I regularly spent time. It was an old building with high ceilings and gloomy corridors. In this place, I felt comfortable, as if I was in another world. As soon as I entered, I was greeted by the familiar aroma of old books and ancient corridors. It was quiet and calm inside the library. I found a secluded corner and started reading one of the books on the shelf. The clock ticked silently, and suddenly I felt uneasy. I looked around and my eyes fell on a strange figure at the far end of the corridor. It was a man in dark clothes, with a wide hood, so that his face was practically invisible. I turned away resolutely and tried to return to reading, but something made me feel like I was being watched. I looked back again, and the figure was closer than before. She approached slowly, and my anxiety grew with every step. Feeling something strange and threatening, I decided to hide among the bookshelves. I glanced at the correspondence I was having at that moment with a friend and tried to remain invisible. My fingers slid over the keys and I wrote, "Something strange is happening in the library. I need help." While waiting for an answer, I continued to watch the figure as it came closer and closer. A few minutes later, I received the answer. "Leave the library immediately." I decided to trust my friend and threw my things, rushing to the exit. Something was moving behind me, and as I ran out of the library, I looked back to see who it was, but there was no one. The figure disappeared. My night in the library left me with a sense of mystery and dread. I never found out what kind of forces lurked in the darkness of those old corridors. It was quite possible that some kind of threat was lurking in wait for me in this quiet and cozy library, and I felt grateful that I managed to leave there in time. I returned home, but the feeling of an unknown threat did not leave me. I began to worry that the mysterious figure I had seen in the library might know about my plans and be keeping an eye on me. Unable to take responsibility for my own actions, I decided to contact the local police and tell them what had happened. Before they arrived, I reread our correspondence with my friend and tried to figure out what could be so terrifying in the library. When the officers arrived, I told them in detail about the hooded figure and how it was approaching me. They decided to search the library to find out who might be hiding inside. The police returned and told me that they found no trace of the intruder, but they promised to increase patrols of the library and urged me to be more careful at night. I felt somewhat relieved, but the fear never completely left me. In the following weeks, I tried to avoid the library after sunset, preferring to stay safe at home. That night in the library left me with a sense of mystery and unsolved mysteries. I never found out who might have been behind that hooded figure or what his intentions were. From time to time, I still think back to that night and remain in the dark about the terrifying secret that might be lurking in the dark corners of that library. Second story. It all started one cold and rainy evening when I accidentally discovered an abandoned library in the heart of the city. The entrance was hidden from view, and the library seemed forgotten by time and abandoned. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to go inside. The light was weak and flickering, and cobwebs stretched between the bookshelves, as if calling to me. In front of me stretched endless rows of old manuscripts and books. I started flipping through the pages of one of the books, and then another. And there, in the back corner of the library, I found it. A book with mystical symbols on the cover that caught my attention. As I read the book, I felt a cool wind pierce me to the bone. The words on the pages began to glow with some strange light, and suddenly I felt like something dark and cold was enveloping me. At that moment, I realized that I had made a huge mistake. In the blink of an eye, the library was transformed before my eyes. It became the site of ancient works and literary masterpieces, and before me stood the ghosts of writers whose names were known to the world. They looked at me with sad and fading eyes. I realized that these souls were caught in the world between life and death, and they became part of this mystical book. Their souls were doomed to wander forever until a way was found to return them to the world of the living. Writers began to contact me, begging for help. They grieved for their lost life and hoped for liberation. I felt hopelessly drawn into this nightmare and knew that I needed to find a way to return the souls of the authors to the world of the living. I began to explore the book and look for clues that would help me unravel the secrets of this mystical library. After all, only when all the mysteries are solved will the souls of writers be able to find peace. But this was only the beginning of a frightening and mysterious adventure that would take me deep into the world of the dead and exact an incredible price. Days turned into nights, and nights into days, as I endlessly immersed myself in researching a mystical book and trying to unravel its magical mysteries. Every time I turned the page, I discovered new authors whose souls were locked in this library hell. They begged me for help, and their ghosts were saturated with bitterness and longing. From the moment I started this journey, I was completely engrossed in this mystical library. I began to explore connections between different authors and works, trying to find clues to their liberation. Each author presented a new challenge, a new mystery, a new puzzle for me to solve. Over time, I noticed that the force that kept the authors in this world became stronger and more sinister. It began to manifest itself in the form of force fields trying to keep me in this hellish world. I felt how she penetrated my thoughts and tried to hinder my efforts. Some of the authors offered deals, promising me knowledge and wisdom if I helped them. Others simply groaned in despair and loss, begging me for help. I was scattered and confused, not knowing how to choose the right path. The worst thing was that the longer I stayed in this library hell, the more my own dreams began to merge with reality. The visions and nightmares became uncontrollable, and I no longer knew what was reality and what was an illusion. My life and my consciousness were on the verge of destruction. I realized that time was slipping away, and that this entire mystical library was hiding secrets that could change the world. But for this, I needed to get to the very end, solve the last riddle, and find a way to free all the ghosts of the authors. The outcome of this struggle was still unclear, and the fear and internal battle continued. But I could not stop until I returned each of these souls to the world of the living, or unraveled the last terrible secret of this library of the dead. Third story. My story began in a small provincial town, where time passed slowly and life was predictable. The library, located in the very center of the city, seemed like a secluded refuge from everyday life. I often went there to spend my free time and lose myself in the worlds of books. One day, while browsing through the bookshelves, I discovered an old book that looked completely different from all the others. The cover was made of old leather with gold designs engraved on it, and the pages were covered with cryptic symbols. The title on the cover read, "The Last Book." My hand was drawn almost like a magnet to this mysterious book. I started reading and my heart sank with fear. The book contained predictions about the end of the world, about destruction and suffering such as the world had never seen. I felt fear overwhelm me, but at the same time, incredible curiosity. The words on the pages seemed alive, as if they were breathing and had a mind of their own. They described signs and symbols that had to be deciphered in order to understand how to prevent the end of the world. Through the fear, a thought slipped through. My mission is to save humanity. I decided to share my findings with others, and having gathered a group of researchers and scientists, we began a detailed study of the book. Our minds were completely absorbed by these mysteries, and our lives began to depend on unraveling the mystical symbols. But the deeper we delved into research, the more we realized that we ourselves were in danger. It seems that someone or something was following us. I often felt an unobtrusive gaze in my back and heard noises in the empty corridors of the library. And one terrible day, we received a mysterious message from an anonymous sender. The message contained just one word: stop. And although this word was just a set of letters, it trembled with threat and warning. But our curiosity and desire to save humanity were stronger than fear. We continued to unravel symbols and signs, despite the looming threat. Our world was filled with mystical energy, and we understood that we had to fight an unknown enemy who wanted to stop our efforts. And so began a race against time to decipher the riddles and signs from the last book and find a way to prevent the impending end of the world. But the closer we came to the solution, the more fears and mysteries we faced. Our world was in danger, and only we could save it. We worked through sleepless nights, absorbed in deciphering symbols and ancient predictions. My team and I didn't know how much time we had left, but the mission to save humanity came first. With each unraveled sign, fear grew. The predictions in the last book were terrible. Famine, disasters, natural disasters, wars, and disease. We understood that this was not just a book, but rather a warning from those who knew about the approaching misfortune. At the same time, mysterious threats continued to arrive, and each new message became more intrusive and frightening. You don't know what you're dealing with. One message read. Stop before it's too late. Read another. We have become subject to strange events and unexplained occurrences. The lamps flickered as if flooded with forces from another world, and something cold and sinister began to appear in the corner of the eye. We felt that our room had become a place in which something terrible was brewing. We even turned to a psychic for help, trying to uncover the source of the threats. The psychic performed the ritual and reported that he sensed the presence of a powerful evil that was associated with the last book. He warned us that we were risking our lives and souls by continuing our research. But our determination was strong. We knew that the source of the threat was closely related to the book and its predictions about the end of the world. We were determined to continue moving forward, even if it meant facing powerful and dark forces. With each open sign, we got closer to the solution. We realized that in order to prevent the predicted catastrophe, we need to find and activate a powerful artifact hidden in the mountains. And now our mission led us into mortal danger, because we were not alone in searching for this artifact. With fear and determination, we set out on a journey that would save humanity from the coming darkness. But our path was dangerous and full of surprises, and we did not know what to expect ahead. Many trials awaited us, and time was not in our favor. Fourth story. For the past few months, my life has been mundane and monotonous. Routine, work, lunches alone, all this filled my days. But one day, my life suddenly turned into a nightmare. It happened on a rainy evening when I decided to escape the muddy puddles and hide in the antique library, which was located in an old building. The library was filled with ancient books, historical artifacts, and mysterious objects. I walked around the room, peering at the polished wooden shelves on which stood thousands of books worthy of attention. And then, as if like a magnet, my eyes were glued to one old book, hidden in the depths of the shelf. Its cover was worn by time, and the pages were yellowed with age. The title of the book is Life Diary. I carefully pulled it out of the shelf and began flipping through the pages. Inside were notes, like a Peruvian incarnation of my own life. The descriptions of the events that happened in my life were accurate and detailed, as if someone was watching me. At first I saw it as a bad joke, but as I read further, fear took hold of me. The entries contained events that had not yet happened, describing my days, as if the author knew about everything in advance. An alarming question awoke inside me. Who did this and why? I noticed that the entries in the life diary became increasingly darker, describing not only my everyday activities, but also my hidden fears and desires. The events noted became increasingly unusual and frightening. Suddenly, I realized that I was reading traces of what would happen in the near future. My heart was pounding in horror when I suddenly heard the sound of footsteps in the shadows between the shelves. I called out, but no one answered. Just in case, I was hiding in a corner, clutching the life diary to my chest. It was at this moment that my smartphone began to make strange sounds and vibrations. I took it and saw a notification about a new message on the screen. However, the sender was not specified. I opened the message and read, "You found the life diary. Now we know everything about you." My hands shook with fear, and I began to ask questions, but received only one cryptic message in response. Time passes, and you will find out the truth. My life has turned into a nightmare. Everything that happened in the life diary began to come true in reality. The events described became alive, exactly copied from the pages of the book. This included moments of joy and happiness, but also terrible scenarios to be endured. I was on the verge of a breakdown, not knowing what destiny I was in control of, and that my actions could have disastrous consequences. I began to be afraid to even take the next step, because I did not know what new events awaited me ahead. One day, I decided to visit the library again to try to find answers to my questions. Answers about who created the life diary and why. But when I entered the building, she realized that she was not alone in this library. Along the quiet corridors, between the shelves, several people in black hoods walked, their faces hidden from my eyes. They slowly approached me, and I realized that they were the ones who had sent me the mysterious messages. One of them, perhaps the leader, pulled back his hood and I saw his face. He looked incredibly serious, and his eyes sparkled with passion and determination. "You have gained strength that none of us could have dreamed of," he said, and his words sounded like a formidable prediction. "You have the power to control destiny, and you are the key to something much greater than you imagine." He went on to say that the Diary of Life was created centuries ago to find a person who could change the course of history, overcome the ominous predictions contained in its pages, and prevent something terrible from happening to humanity. My head was spinning with these revelations, and I realized that I was involved in something beyond my wildest imagination. But our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another hoodie. He was younger and carrying another copy of the life diary, and my fears intensified with the realization that they had control over my destiny. Fifth story. The events of my life suddenly turned into a nightmare when I decided to investigate a series of disappearances that began to occur in our local library. My curiosity and thirst for knowledge led me into dark and mystical secrets that overwhelmed me. In a small provincial town, our library was a real architectural masterpiece. With its many rooms and thousands of books, it was a place where I spent hours immersed in the worlds of words. But recently, strange events have been happening in the library. It all started with stories about people who disappeared after reading a certain book. At first, it seemed incredible, but as the number of disappearances grew, fear began to creep in on our village. People began to avoid the library, and its turnover dropped significantly. Some who read the banned book claimed that they entered a mystical world where time and space did not exist. They were lost and couldn't find a way out. I decided to study this phenomenon and find out what was happening. Inside the library, I found a table with books that were associated with these disappearances. The most mysterious was a book called Labyrinth of the Forgotten Ancients. I sat at the table and started reading. Each page of the book described something strange and inexplicable. She spoke of portals to another dimension and of creatures that lurked in the shadows. I felt that every word was absorbed into my soul, and I became part of this dark story. When I finished reading and looked up, I discovered that I was no longer in the same library as before. Before me was a labyrinth, dark and frightening. As I understand it, I found myself in the world described in the Labyrinth of the Forgotten Ancients. Inside the labyrinth, I met other people who also ended up in this nightmare place. We tried to find a way out, but every attempt ended in a dead end and new riddles. Through the darkness and silence, there were whispers and strange sounds that filled us with horror. We realized that this labyrinth was not just a library curse, but something much worse. We needed to find a way back to our world, but as time passed, our hope faded. We wandered through the maze for many hours, trying to find any traces that would help us get back. All our attempts were unsuccessful, and in the unequal struggle with the endless walls and corridors of the labyrinth, our nerves began to fail. We discovered that inside the labyrinth, the rules of reality were broken. The past, present, and future merged into one, and we could not make out where one moment ended and another began. Time was losing its meaning, and the world around us became increasingly gloomy and unpredictable. One day, when our hope was already running out, we came across an ancient artifact that was described in a book. It was of an incomprehensible shape, dotted with mystical symbols, and emitted a faint light. This was our only chance to return home. We realized that the artifact was the key, and we must activate it to break this curse. Our combined efforts, inspired by fear and hope, helped us unravel the mysterious symbols and activate the artifact. The next thing we remember is a deafening light and the sensation of falling. We were returned to our world, but not in the same library where it all began. Our stories diverge. We no longer sought each other and lost contact, but our experience in the labyrinth remained with us forever, and we knew that we would never again set foot in the library, which had become the gateway to a dark world from which there was no return. I was left with the feeling that I had found answers to questions that many would prefer to leave unanswered. The library turned out to be not only a repository of knowledge, but also a place where reality and mysticism intertwine, creating a dangerous labyrinth for those who decide to rummage through its mysteries. Sixth story. It has been several years since my group of archaeological artifact researchers, and I embarked on a journey that would change our lives forever. We stood in front of an impressive and ancient building, a library that seemed forgotten by time. The library was filled with tens of thousands of old books, ancient scrolls, and artifacts collected from all over the world. Our task was to find unique records of myths and predictions related to the end of the world. Many considered this to be superstition, but our group were true enthusiasts, and we were ready to explore every corner of this library. While we were sorting through dusty sources, my colleagues came across something amazing. Ancient tables covered with mysterious symbols. At first, we thought that these were just documents related to astrology and astronomy, but as we examined them more, it became clear that there was something more to them. The tables described events that converged in time, predicting the date of the end of the world. Our hearts pounded as we realized that this was not only a prediction, but also a calendar leading up to the moment of the apocalypse. We continued to explore the records, and they became increasingly darker. Descriptions of natural phenomena, disasters, and world events that we have just heard about in the news have been confirmed in these pages. It was as if one of the ancient astronomers had access to knowledge that was inaccessible to our civilization. The tables predicted the date of the end of the world, and it was much closer than we expected. Panic gripped our group. We were filled with fear and helplessness in the face of the inevitable. We tried to find any additional records that could give us at least some hope of salvation, but all attempts were in vain. While we were still in the library, cell phones started ringing and notifications came in with breaking news about natural disasters and global upheavals. It was like the predictions coming true. The realization that we could be witnessing the end of the world filled us with horror. We left the library in a hurry, even though the tables still held dark secrets. From then on, I could not forget what we had found, and the days passed by in anticipation of something terrible that was steadily approaching. Over time, the fear and anxiety of the predicted end of the world began to slowly fade away, and we decided to return to the library to study the ancient tables in more detail. Our desire to understand and unravel them was mixed with an unwavering curiosity and desire to know the truth. However, when we returned to the library, we found that the doors led to an empty room. At first, we thought it was some kind of strange bug or error, but as we investigated, we realized that something serious had happened. The library in which we saw the ancient tables has disappeared. In its place, there was only emptiness and dust. We tried to contact the administration, but it turned out that no one had heard of such a library in our city. It was as if she never existed. Our documents and photographs of tables were the only evidence of our research, but they also disappeared somewhere. We have been unable to find any trace of the ancient tables or library in archives, on the internet, or in personal records. It was like a dream that dissipated when morning came. We began to question our perception and the reality of what had happened. There seemed to be evidence, but it disappeared, as if erased from our lives. However, one thing remained constant: the fear of predictions from the tables. We couldn't shake the feeling that they might actually be true, and that the end of the world was closer than we'd like to think. So we were left with a mystery that had no answer. Our research in the library became a mysterious disappearance, and we were left with only doubts and hope that the predictions would never come true. Seventh story. It was quiet and dark in the library, as it only happens in the very late hours. I entered with the hope of finding information for my research work. But when I went deeper inside, I noticed that something was wrong. At first, I simply lost my orientation among the bookshelves. I wandered among the meter-long shelves, but found nothing. Then I noticed that the sections seemed endless, as if the library had stretched into another dimension. My panic began to rise as I tried to return to the doors I had come through, only to find that they had disappeared. Instead, there were endless shelves of books. I was standing in a maze of words and letters with no way out. Attempts to find someone or even go outside were unsuccessful. All I saw around me were walls of books. Everything here was so unreal that my hand began to tremble when I touched one of the books. Over time, the situation became worse. I began to hear rustling and whispering, as if someone was watching me. My footsteps echoed along the shelves, and I felt as if invisible eyes were surrounding me. Every minute, I became more and more immersed in this endless world of books. I felt as if the structure of reality was changing, and I could no longer distinguish between the world of books and reality. And suddenly, from the depths of the labyrinth, a strange sound was heard. It was the sound of pages rustling and growling, as if huge books were awakening to life. I felt invisible forces pushing me deeper, and my life hung in the balance. The struggle for survival began, and I realized that there was something sinister and incomprehensible in this world of books. There is only one question left: how can I get out of this endless library labyrinth? And will I even have a chance to return to the world of reality? My struggle in this library labyrinth was cruel and endless. I continued to wander among the shelves, trying to find a way out, but it seemed that it was eluding me. Time lost its meaning, and I could not determine how many days or weeks I spent in this nightmare. During this period, I encountered various strange phenomena. Some books seemed to be alive, and they made whispers and sounds as if they were trying to communicate. Other books changed their covers and pages, taking on different shapes, as if they were trying to confuse me. My body and mind began to experience strange influences. I felt as if I had forgotten what the world outside of this library looked like. My thoughts became clouded, and I even forgot my own name. From time to time, I heard voices that whispered riddles and conspiracies to me. They talked about temptations and choices I had to make, but it was all part of a dark show in which I found myself the main character. Despite all the difficulties and trials, I did not give up. I knew I had to find a way to get out of this nightmare and return to the real world. My thirst for freedom was stronger than the fear that surrounded me. And then one day I discovered a rack that seemed familiar to me. There was a book with my name on it on the shelf. I opened it, and inside were notes that I myself had made before entering the library. These were my own words, reminding me of my purpose and desire to return home. This moment was the key to my salvation. I realized that the answers to my questions were within me, and that I had to go through trials to find a way out of this endless labyrinth. With every step, every riddle, and every challenge, I got closer to solving the puzzle. My mind became clear, and I realized that the library was not just a maze, but also a mirror of my own fears and doubts. And finally, when I solved the last riddle, the walls of the library slowly began to crumble and light began to penetrate inside. I felt the moisture in my hair and the smell of fresh air. I returned to the world of reality, and suddenly realized that I had not spent days or weeks here, but only a few hours. Time passed differently inside the library. From that moment on, I never returned to that library, but it left its mark on my soul. This library maze became a symbol of my ability to overcome my fears and challenges in life, and I was never again afraid of endless labyrinths, whether inside me or outside. Eighth story. It was an ordinary day when I decided to spend time in the library. I was interested in researching old books and antiquarian literature. While casually looking through the shelves, my gaze fell on an old book that looked very unusual. The cover of the book was covered with unknown symbols, and the fragments of text that were visible did not resemble any language known to me. The title of the book was written in Latin and sounded like Liber Maledictum, Book of Curses. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to take this book with me, not suspecting that this decision would change my life forever. Returning home, I began to study the strange text in the Book of Curses. The symbols and signs were incomprehensible, but slowly, after a few days, I began to understand their meaning. These were curses and spells capable of summoning evil forces. At first, I didn't take this book seriously, but soon strange events began to happen around me. My dreams began to fill with nightmares, and unfamiliar shadows appeared in the house. My physical and mental memory began to weaken. I would forget important details from the past and could not concentrate on anything. The experience was like a living nightmare, and I began to realize that the Book of Curses was not a toy. I tried to get rid of the book, burn it, throw it away, but somehow it always came back to me. My own despair and fear of damnation rendered me powerless. I turned to experts in the field of occultism, but no one could help me. They said that the Book of Curses had a power that could not simply be thrown away. More and more, I lost control of myself. My thoughts became dark and creepy, and I began to experience an internal conflict between myself and the forces that the cursed book called upon. Every day, the curse intensified. The shadows that were chasing me became more and more real, and I felt them getting closer. And then I received a mysterious message on my computer. It was an anonymous correspondence, and I realized that someone knew about my problem and was ready to help. The anonymous author claimed that he knew a way to break this curse, but to do this, I would have to go through a series of dangerous tests and reveal the secret of the Book of Curses. I made up my mind and agreed to this proposal. After all, I no longer had a choice, and I was ready to do anything to free myself from this gloomy fate. From that moment on, I began to collaborate with an anonymous assistant who became my only guide in this nightmare. He taught me how to decipher the symbols and spells in the Book of Curses and explained that only through understanding and control of this magic can one attempt to break the curse. My days and nights flew by studying texts and collecting information about the Book of Curses. My strength was quickly depleted, and I knew that every step towards a solution brought me more and more danger. An anonymous ally warned me against contacting the shadow that began to follow me. He called it the Shadow of Curse and warned that it was a powerful being created by the curse of the book. The shadow tried to confuse me and weaken my will to make me give up. Every day, I fought the shadow of damnation, and each encounter was more terrifying. She took on different forms, mixing in herself nightmarish images from my subconscious. My anonymous ally advised me to use my mind and will to contain the shadow. I learned to fight its influence and not give in to fear. It wasn't an easy workout, and my nerves were on edge. From time to time, I received cryptic messages from an anonymous assistant that helped me uncover the secrets of the Book of Curses. He said that the key to breaking the curse lay in the book itself and my understanding of its true essence. Gradually, I began to see how the Book of Curses was trying to manipulate me, how it was trying to bend me to its will. It was a moment of epiphany, and I realized that the curse was using me to achieve its goals. I decided to open the last chapter of the Book of Curses, which seemed the darkest and locked. An anonymous ally warned me that this would be the most dangerous test yet, but that it might be the key to liberation. Every minute that I read the spells and symbols from the last chapter, my connection to the Book of Curses weakened. But the powers of the Shadow of Curse intensified. and she tried to stop me. The end of this battle was near, and only at the moment when I read the last symbol, the book of curses exploded, and my eyes were blinded by light. Ninth story. From that moment, it all started. I was one of the regular visitors to this cozy library, where I was in the habit of spending my free time. This was once my refuge from the hustle and bustle of the world, but now it has become a place of nightmare. One day, when I was looking for a new book to read, my eyes fell on an old book with a mysterious cover that seemed forgotten by time. The title was in Latin and seemed familiar to me: De Pestilentia Libri, the Book of Plague. Out of curiosity, I decided to pick it up and start reading. It was written in a language unknown to me, but I felt that it was something important and mysterious. As I started reading, I noticed that the text was dark and scary. The book described strange rituals that seemed something mystical and terrifying. As I read, I felt sick and dizzy. Strangely, my hands began to tremble, and my vision became blurred. I closed the book with difficulty and felt that my head was beginning to burst with pain. Leaving the Book of Plague on the table, I tried to leave the library, hoping that the fresh air would help me return to normal. But when I went outside, I was seized by a cough and fever. I returned home, hoping that sleep would help me get rid of the disease, but it only made my condition worse. At night, I would wake up sweating and afraid to open my eyes again for fear of having nightmares. As the days passed, I noticed that more and more library patrons also began to get sick and complain of symptoms similar to mine. It was as if this strange book transmitted infection to everyone who read it. The librarians became concerned and began searching for the book that could have caused this epidemic. But it seems that the Book of Plague disappeared from the library, as mysteriously as it appeared. I tried to contact other visitors who had also read the Book of Plagues, but most of them were too sick or scared to respond to my messages. Every day the symptoms became worse. I developed a rash on my body and my skin began to peel. The headache was unbearable, and I began to have nightmares and hallucinations that scared me to the point of insomnia. I knew that I had to unravel the mystery of this book in order to find a cure or a way to get rid of the curse, but my time was running out quickly, and I felt that I was on the verge of death. In search of answers, I began to research the history of this mysterious book. Turning to the library's archives, I learned that the Book of Plague was part of a collection of ancient artifacts found in an ancient basement several years ago. Apparently, it was lost and forgotten for centuries. I realized with horror that I was not alone in my struggle. There are others who are trapped in this book, and they also suffer from terrible symptoms. We started a support group in hopes of finding a cure. Together, we tried to decode the text of the Book of Plague and unravel its secrets. It turned out that it contained not only descriptions of mystical rituals, but also many spells and symbols that are unknown to us. We were like gathered scientists trying to solve the riddle of death. Suddenly, one of our members began to utter strange words, and the air was filled with a strong smell of sulfur. The next moment, he disappeared before our eyes. We were left in shock, and it seemed as if he had been transported to some other dimension or place. It was too terrible, but we had to move on in search of answers. We collected all the available data about the book and began to look for all sorts of magical sources that could help us understand its origin and essence. Soon, we managed to find ancient antiquity, which told us that the Book of Plague is a magical artifact created in ancient times to cause plague and disease. Its power lay in a curse that could spread to anyone who touched its text. With this information, we decided to look for a way to destroy the Book of Plague. But we needed to collect additional data and materials in order to successfully cope with this evil. Every day was a challenge, and our symptoms were getting worse. We knew that we had little time, and that only by unraveling the secrets of the book could we find a way to free ourselves from this nightmare. 10th story. My story began in a small, cozy library in an old building, which always seemed to me a mysterious and attractive place. I visited it on weekends to find refuge from the bustling metropolis and immerse myself in the world of books. One day, while looking for a new book to read, I came across an old wooden box, forgotten among the shelves. Underneath was an antique tape recorder and several old cassette tapes. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to turn on the device. From the first seconds, I realized that this was something special. The recordings contained voices that sounded like whispers from the past. An old tape recorder played audio recordings with messages from the dead. These were the voices of people who had passed away, but seemed to continue to communicate with us through these recordings. I listened in wonder and fear as the voices recounted their memories, predicted the future, and warned me of the dangers that might await me. It was an incredible and terrifying experience at the same time. One of the entries stood out from the crowd. The voice I heard seemed familiar. He called my name and warned me of imminent danger. It was incredibly scary. I could not understand how these records could know about my existence and what was happening in my life. In search of answers, I approached a librarian and asked where these notes came from. He shrugged and said that they had been discovered several years ago in an old box, and no one could explain their origin. With each new entry, I felt fear take over me. The voices told me that they were watching me, that they had important messages for me, and that I should be careful. One day, while I was listening to the recording, a voice began to predict events that would happen the next day. This was an accurate description of my meeting with a friend, which no one but me could know. It was incredible and scary. I tried to investigate the origin of these records, but each next step led me to new mysteries and questions that had no answers. My life became a real nightmare, and I didn't know what to do. The voices continued to speak to me, predicting events and situations that seemed incredible. Every day my life became more unpredictable and scary. I felt like something was watching me, something invisible but very real. I could no longer ignore these recordings and the voices that spoke to me through the tape recorder. What it was, a supernatural phenomenon, a technological trick, or something else, I did not know. But I was determined to find out the truth and understand what to do next. Every day, the voices from the recordings became more insistent and alarming. They predicted not only my personal events, but also global events in the world. My loved ones began to think I was crazy when I told them about this strange tape recorder and the voices of the dead who told me about the future. I decided that I could not continue to live in this mystery and decided to find a professional who could help me solve this mystery. I turned to a paranormal researcher who specialized in such phenomena. The researcher analyzed the recordings and the tape recorder, but could not explain how it all worked. He argued that such recordings violated all laws of science and that it could be related to something supernatural. He recommended that I leave everything as it was and not listen to the recordings anymore. However, I could not simply give up the search for truth. I immersed myself in studying the audio recordings and tried to reveal the messages of the dead. But the deeper I dug, the more anxiety and fear I became. One day, while listening to a recording, a voice began to predict his own death. It was like a nightmare that I couldn't stop. The voice spoke about my death in detail, describing terrible events. I felt like I was under a curse and that the notes were taking over my life. I couldn't listen to them anymore, but I couldn't stop either. My life has turned into a nightmare. I began to avoid the library, but voices followed me even outside its walls. I did not know how to get rid of this damned connection and free myself from the records that predicted my death. Every day, fear and helplessness gripped me more and more. I understood that this story would destroy me, but I could not find a way out of this trap. The tape recorder and audio recordings became my dark companions that haunted me.